Afternoon and welcome to UOB Asset Management's webinar on sustainability. My name is Victor Wong. I lead UOB AM's Sustainability Office and I will be your host for today. Thank you for sharing your lunchtime with us. We will try our best to make this webinar a good complement to your meal. And if you have already finished your lunch, then let this be dessert. Now, looking at the webinar's title, From Values to Value, Sustainability Trends and Solutions. Now, sustainability and sustainable investing are key megatrends. As with any megatrend, there will be risks and challenges. But today, our distinguished panel of speakers will show you how to navigate these risks, how to overcome these challenges, tell you the solutions, and show you how to benefit from these opportunities. Here at UOB AM, we are fund managers, we are asset managers. We believe we can and should play a key role in sustainable investing. Our management has set a clear direction and strategy supported by our capabilities, both internal and through our partnerships. So now I have the pleasure of welcoming Mr. Teo Boon Kiat, CEO of UOB Asset Management, to make the keynote speech. And Boon Kiat will give you compelling reasons why you should join the sustainable investing journey. Boon Kiat, over to you.
Thank you, Victor. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and welcome to the third part of our Ride the Markets with UOBM webinar series, with today's focus on sustainability, trends, potential, and opportunity. Let me start off the day with the words, the time is now. Sustainability is on the cusp of a mega trend in Asia. It has been gaining ground in recent times and has become much more pervasive and influential in the decisions taken by governments, businesses, and even individuals. And in many respects, 2020 has been the catalyst and that point of inflection. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought the pace and scale of change around the world up several notches, with a renewed focus on climate change as the next big crisis. But with many industries also slowing down during the pandemic, we also saw a glimpse into a world less disrupted by climate change, and that is the world that we all want to live in. Many governments have also made their commitments towards climate action. US President Joe Biden has placed climate change high on his political agenda. And even though there may be many challenges in its implementation, it is evident that the US will play a much greater role in leading global efforts towards climate action. And encouragingly here in Asia, more countries, and in particular governments and regulators, are also stepping up, joining traditional pace setters such as Japan and South Korea to drive sustainability. Notably, the elephant in the room, China, is also getting into the act. It is boosting its climate action efforts with its September 2020 promulgation of its goal to achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. And closer to home here in Singapore, Singapore's renaming of the Ministry of Environment and Water Resources to the Ministry of Sustainability and the Environment is a clear statement of the government's intent and response to what our Prime Minister referred to in his 2019 National Day rally speech as the existential threat of climate change. The Singapore Green Plan that was recently unveiled has been yet another effort to mobilize the country's resources to take action to forge a sustainable future for our next generations, driven by key initiatives in green energy, centered around solar energy and electric vehicles. The plan will also promote sustainability as the engine for jobs and growth, with Jurong Island being set up to become a sustainable energy and chemicals park. And in the financial sector, there's also been many key developments by the MAS in finalizing the environmental risk guidelines for banks, and now more recently, also developing a taxonomy on financing environmentally sustainable activities. We should not underestimate the top-down impact of such actions of these public authorities, as they have the power to use both carrot and the stick to propel the momentum towards sustainability. For companies, there's also been a greater urgency to focus on issues such as the environment, labor conditions, and human capital management. With greater incentives and favorable access to capital, companies will now be able to better drive their efforts to improve the ESG effects of their business policies and practices. Indeed, I dare say that it will become a business risk not to embrace sustainability. And in the investment sphere, we have also seen a greater push for a more structured approach to achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. In particular, the UN-supported Principles for Responsible Investment, or PRI, recently released a new framework that highlights how investors can help the SDGs through our investment decisions, stewardship of investee companies, and engagement with key stakeholders. And to that end, asset owners in Asia, from sovereign wealth funds and public institutions to family offices and corporate investors, are now taking a much more active and serious view towards incorporating sustainability actively into their investments. In Malaysia, for example, EPF has described sustainability as the vaccine for any crisis, alongside their commitment for 100% of their investments to be based on ESG principles by 2030. And over in Thailand, the Government Pension Fund, or GPF, is aiming to use an ESG lens for all of its investments in the Thai market across equity classes, including real estate, private equity, and infrastructure. So in advocating sustainability, the investment community has an integral role to play in channeling funds to support sustainable enterprises and business models, and also to incorporate ESG into our investment frameworks. Which brings me nicely to conclude my address today with yet another phrase: from values to value, the tagline for today's event. In essence, I see the convergence between our human values to financial values that we investment professionals pride ourselves to be experts on. In the long term, we just have to realize that what ultimately happens in the capital markets will simply be a reflection of what actually happens in the real world. And therein lies the opportunity with the sustainability megatrend, that we can invest for both profit and purpose, something that I hope that you can glean from today's webinar. I wish all of you a fruitful hour with us today. Thank you. And back to you, Victor.
Thank you, Boon Kiat. I think in your speech, you had two key points which really resonated with me. The first, the time is now, and we can invest for both profit and purpose. If we had brought up the topic of sustainable investing in Asia a few years ago, you get responses ranging from, isn't this a European thing? Or, yeah, it sounds interesting, but Asia is too early. More recently, the responses have started coming to, yeah, I think we better start looking at this now. We better start putting in place a strategy. And I think another way we have been looking at this is that if the strategy is now, the time is now, then I think it is very important that we grasp this opportunity. Okay, so now at this point in time, I'm going to give some more answers from our guest speaker, Marja Zandbergen from Robeco. Now, Robeco, as you know, is a leading fund manager, and they have been in the forefront of producing investment solutions in sustainable investing. Marcia is the head of sustainability integration at Robeco, and I would like to invite her now to share her insights. Marcia, over to you.
Thank you, Victor, and good afternoon, everyone. So let's talk about global sustainability trends. Sustainability is often seen as a risk, but I would say the biggest risk is not seeing the opportunities. So what we'll be talking about in the next 10 to 15 minutes is really about seeing those opportunities. Sustainable trends are changing markets, and what does that look like? And what are the investment opportunities that go with it? And also, I would really like to say something about not forgetting to address the weak points, not only looking at the opportunities, but also try to address some of the weak points. So what are the sustainability trends that we are seeing that are driving this change in markets? Well, some of the important trends I sum up here. It's of course climate change. It's the scarcity of natural resources, but also social issues like rising inequality and the effect that digitalization has on our societies and economies. And these trends are driving change in markets through three mechanisms. One, of course, is technological progress, so innovation and disruption. Companies that are not innovative enough will be disrupted by newcomers to the market. This is not new, but this is something that we will see in these trends as well. The second one is consumer awareness and also societal awareness and rising expectations that companies really need to take care of their human capital and also of the environment. And sustainable companies really can deliver solutions to these challenges. And then the third one, I think it was already mentioned earlier also, is regulation. Governments, of course, can foster and drive change in markets when it comes to these issues that we really need to address. So let me give an example that is probably quite obvious to you, but Bloomberg New Energy Finance, they calculated that the world has reached around $500 billion every year in investments to decarbonize the energy system. These investments go to clean power generation and electric transport mostly, and technologies like electric heat or carbon capture and storage and hydrogen are attracting less investments, but I assume that these trends will actually really continue and that also investments in these areas will grow. And this has drastically changed the markets for some of the companies that we invest in, like the automobile companies, the utilities, and the mining companies, for example. So how do we then translate these global trends into investment opportunities for the next decade? We find the Sustainable Development Goal framework of the UN a very helpful framework and a good guidance for trends towards a more sustainable future. And we group them into 5 key areas. One is the basic needs. And then you have to think about things like preventive healthcare, medical technology, but also healthy food and clean water. The second trend that we see is healthy planet. And really, to keep our planet healthy and not deplete our finite resources, we see opportunities in renewable energy, in circular economy solutions like in waste reduction and recycling, and any products that help environmental protection, for example, on smart agriculture. The third topic that we see is sustainable societies, and I think you will get a little bit more on that in a later presentation as well today. But we talk about energy efficient infrastructure, about smart cities, e-mobility, and also automation software, for example. And this is an area where we're also seeing a lot of opportunities. And then when it comes to the fourth and fifth trend that we are seeing, equality and opportunity and robust institutions, it's a little bit more difficult to invest in those. But we do see some opportunities, for example, in gender equality. And we have a strong conviction also that companies that have more diversity, and research really also underpins that, shows that that leads to better business results. So let's dig a little bit deeper, just as an example, into the second trend of the healthy planet. Energy demand is still projected to grow substantially over the next coming years until 2030 by roughly 9% per annum. But we also need to, at the same time, decarbonize the economy. So that means we really need to move to cleaner energy, but it also has to be affordable and it has to be reliable. And what is needed for that is, first of all, of course, for the cost to come down massively. And they have already done so, but they need to come down even further. And we also need to build new infrastructures. As the electricity is generated more locally and it's also less consistent over time, we need smart grids and storage, for example. And next to batteries, we also see opportunities for hydrogen, for example, for long-term storage of renewable energy, but still there needs to be a lot of investments to really go into that, and it needs to be developed further. So let's make it a little bit more concrete. When we invest in a healthy planet, we distinguish 4 different categories that we invest in. Obviously, renewable energy, but also energy management, energy distribution, and energy efficiency. Some few examples. In energy management, we invest in semiconductor corporations that supply very efficient semiconductors for data and power management, for example. In energy efficiency, we also invest in semiconductor companies that have power, semiconductor materials and optic connectivity components, for example, but also companies that design high performance networks and storage processors. So you really have to think about more specialized small to mid-cap stocks, but we also invest in larger names like Johnson Controls, for example, who help their clients save energy and decarbonize as well. So these are some examples of this trend, but of course there are a lot of other trends that I also mentioned that we have specialized investments into. So how do we invest in those trends? We have several thematic strategies and solutions that play into all of these different themes, and you can see them on this slide. But we also have strategies that focus on all of the trends simultaneously, and those are sustainable development goal strategies. And we have solutions both in equities and in credits. And these are less concentrated than these very specific thematic strategies. And they provide a very nice core part of a portfolio that is nicely diversified, but with the goal to invest in companies that actually contribute and profit from these sustainable developments, while at the same time generating excellent returns. And an example of this is our SDG credit income strategy. And we use, of course, all that specific expertise to really select those stocks that really generate a neutral to a positive contribution to the SDGs. And we've also seen from research that these investments actually in the last, and it's not a very long history that we have that we can do research in, but in the last 5 years actually had lower volatility but better returns. So it's an excellent strategy also from a financial perspective. Now, I really also want to talk a little bit about the weak spots, because climate, of course, is something that we really see as a very important topic. But there are other trends that I also mentioned, like rising inequality and what is digitalization actually doing to our societies. So I think it's also important to make sure that the companies that you invest in do not have negative impact in any of the trends that we have mentioned, because in the end, that's going to be not a good solution from an investment perspective, but that will take a very long time. But also, I think it's a responsibility of the financial sector to take care of its fiduciary duty and look at what companies are doing really harm. And here you can see in this slide an example of the types of areas that we exclude out of our investments. And we believe are areas of business that we don't want to be investing in. And also we look at controversial behavior, for example. So how do companies adhere to human rights, to labor standards, to environmental principles, and also to anti-corruption? So these are some of the areas. And then, of course, we can use active ownership as a tool to really, if we invest in companies, to really address some of the weak spots as well. At Robeco, we've had like 15 years of experience already in active ownership. And we've done a lot of engagement on climate, and we are intensifying this. And this is for, let's say, broader portfolios, very important. But the strategies that we're talking about today that actually only invest in companies that, really have innovative growth, companies that are technology, industry, healthcare. Some of the other issues ESG issues are also relevant, mostly corporate governance, human rights, labor issues. For example, when we look at artificial intelligence, which is an important tool that some of these companies can use, they are very interesting, but they can also create certain human rights issues. For example, if we train the systems using a certain data set that is not inclusive, it can actually lead to biases. And that's very important. Or some of the hidden repetitive work that goes into developing systems and checking systems, we call it click work, is often underpaid and very difficult work. So while you want to be invested in these companies, I think it's very important to also address these type of issues, and engagement can be a very powerful tool to do that. And then lastly, wrapping up, sustainable trends, as we have shown, are changing markets through new technologies, through consumer behavior, and also through regulation. And we can reap the investment opportunities by investing in these trends, but we also should not forget to address the weak spots. And that is what I would like to share with you today.
Very good afternoon, everyone. I think now we will move into the segment of climate smart solutions, whereby we'll cover the themes of smart sustainable cities and powering the future. So now, as I dive into this theme of smart sustainable cities, let me first draw your attention to Singapore, which was ranked as the world's smartest city in 2020. And to better understand what makes a smart city smart, you look at the following 5 key pillars, where the smart component comes in the form of automation and optimization of these pillars to improve resource management. And this has close ties to the concept of sustainability. And on this same note of sustainability, Singapore has been advancing its sustainability agenda through its Green Plan 2030 and development of more green infrastructure projects, which will look to transform Singapore from a smart city into a smart, sustainable city. And now what we see is that projects will be financed through bonds, and around 19 billion worth of green bonds have already been earmarked for this purpose. Furthermore, it's observed that the government issuance of green bonds can also encourage other market players to issue green, sustainability, or sustainability-linked bonds, otherwise known as GSS bonds. Moving to what we dub as an Asia Green Plan, we predict countries in Asia will follow in Singapore's footsteps, and GSS bonds will be issued by governments to allocate capital towards supporting climate and sustainability initiatives whilst developing their very own smart sustainable cities. Furthermore, some key sectors that will support the issuance of GSS bonds in Asia have been identified to be banks, renewable and real estate companies, and together with governments, they provide a sustainably focused fixed income investment opportunity that you can look out for. Now, moving on to some investment opportunities on the equity side of things. We have actually identified several sustainability themes under each pillar of smart cities. And why we think this is an ideal investment area is because we project investments into smart cities to rise over US $1 trillion per annum from 2025 onwards. And on the pillar of buildings, on the bottom left, we look to green building constructions because we want buildings to be built both smart and sustainably. And as such, we look at CapitaLand, who is both a leader in sustainability and also a leading real estate developer. Now, on transport pillar, we look to green transport options such as electric bus manufacturers, and in waste and water management, we look out for companies providing sustainable solutions at a municipal scale. Finally, on the pillar of energy, we look to energy efficient solutions such as IoT smart lighting to optimize city-level energy consumption. And on the renewable energy front, we look out for companies that have strong regional presence and smart energy production solutions. And one such example is actually Beacon Power, which with its strong presence in Thailand, Vietnam, Oman, and the Philippines, is also developing large-scale solar farms in both underutilized and unused spaces. And now, on this very topic of energy, I'd like to ask all of you, have you heard about the hydrogen economy? Well, in this next theme of powering the future, we're actually looking at hydrogen as an energy source to power economies and the investment opportunities arising from it. So in this next slide, similar to smart sustainable cities, the hydrogen economy is also experiencing similar support and push by governments in Asia to increase its scale and deployment. And most notably, there have been novel development of hydrogen city clusters in South Korea, where the government is optimistic on hydrogen power and is setting its sights on hydrogen powering 30% of cities in the near future. Now, hydrogen also fit into multi-energy systems where it can be used as a power source or as a medium for long-term energy storage. This is why we also see Japan looking to hydrogen to account for 10% of its total energy mix. Now, furthermore, we also observe ambitious goals in China for the production of fuel cell electric vehicles to be on roads in the next decade, and this indicates a positive outlook on the future of a hydrogen economy. Now, you might be wondering, with such positive sentiments, why hasn't the hydrogen economy already taken off? And well, to answer that question, you first need to understand that not all hydrogen is created equal. So there are primarily three types of hydrogen, namely gray, blue, and green. And these colors correspond to the methods of production, the level of harmfulness to the environment. Now, gray hydrogen is the most harmful as it's made from methane reforming and releases significant amounts of carbon emissions into the environment. And blue hydrogen, which is actually made from the same process as gray hydrogen, is less harmful because carbon emissions are actually captured and stored. And finally, we have green hydrogen, which is the most ideal type of hydrogen as it's produced entirely from electrolysis of water as feedstock and is powered by renewable energy with zero carbon emissions. And this is the key element for a sustainable hydrogen economy moving forward. And coming back to the question I posed earlier, why hasn't the hydrogen economy taken off? Well, it's really because of cost. So green hydrogen is still really costly to produce. And technologies for carbon capture in blue hydrogen is not at a large scale and advanced. And really because we don't want to produce gray hydrogen on such a large scale at the expense of the environment. So what can be done? Well, on the right-hand side here, you see, we foresee the solution will come in the form of government support to improve economies of scale and lower the cost of green hydrogen production. And as you see on the right here, the opportunity map, what you observe is that in these key Asian countries, governments in Japan, South Korea, and China are actually providing strong financial and regulatory support to push ahead with the development of a sustainable hydrogen economy. Now, let's move into the next slide where we can explore some possible investment opportunities in the value chain of a sustainable hydrogen economy. So to sustain a sustainable hydrogen economy, there needs to be an increase in the production of green hydrogen. And this will require even more production of renewable energy. So this is why we see renewable energy solution providers such as Long Power, which is one of Asia's largest wind power producer, as well as Jinko Solar, one of the world's largest solar panel manufacturer, standing to benefit from this. Now, next down the line of the sustainable hydrogen value chain will be electrolyzers, which will be a critical component of green hydrogen production. And as green hydrogen production increases, so too will the demand for electrolyzers, and companies manufacturing them will stand to profit. And as we move further down the value chain, you see that hydrogen can actually be utilized for many areas such as power, industry, and transport. And on this area of transport, we see big opportunities in hydrogen fuel cell vehicles due to certain advantages. So take, for example, hydrogen power heavy-duty vehicles have a competitive advantage over, say, battery electric vehicles because they are able to take heavier loads, have longer driving ranges, and even shorter refueling times. And some of the key players in the Asian market that we are looking out for includes like Komatsu, Toyota Motor Corp, and Hino Motors. And moving further down the transport line, we are also looking at shipping, which will play a critical part in enabling a green hydrogen economy. And as well as the green hydrogen economy, we will need a supply chain. So this is where we look to companies like Kawasaki Heavy Industries, which is developing the world's first liquefied hydrogen carrier. So all in all, actually, what we see is that empowering the future with hydrogen will be a green investment opportunity that you can keep a lookout for. And really to wrap things up and say recap on the two teams. So on smart sustainable cities, it's with growing regulatory support and emphasis on climate change that the development of smart sustainable cities will see a boom. So similarly, strong regulatory support will be a key driving factor advancing the hydrogen economy as an energy source for the future. Now, with these two teams in mind, I hope you gain some useful insights on how you can invest for both profit and purpose.
Coming back to this webinar, as you can see on screen, 3 Chinese characters. For those of you who are not familiar with Chinese, allow me to help. The first 2 letters is Wei Ji, okay? The first 2 Chinese characters, what they mean, crisis. Now, if you were to add 1 more Chinese character, it becomes Ji. Crisis transforms into an opportunity. And I think that's what we want to do today. We want to show you we have problems now, we have risks and challenges, but we're going to transform them. So if I can move on to the next slide. And again, this is not a technical issue, right? Don't adjust your screens. It is in black and white. So the problem is that we have here is that we are facing huge difficulties and challenges, climate change, adverse impacts to society. Clearly, there's a move towards urbanization. Increasing urbanization leads to increased energy demands. And where are we meeting these needs now? Primarily fossil fuels. So as you know, pollutions, rising greenhouse gases emissions, rising temperatures. That's compounded by overpopulation. overpopulation now is a huge issue because in Asia, we have a population of about 4.6 billion today. By 2050, we're looking at another 500 million people more. And to give you an idea, of course, you just look at Singapore's size, 6 million, you get an idea of the scale of the problems facing us. And then last but not least, these first two problems will lead to the third set of problems, social injustice and inequality. So climate change, COVID. I think COVID brought into sharp focus. If you're not prepared in terms of the social element, you're going to have issues. And that's why we say that, look, you've got to start looking at inequality and how this, for example, governance as well, and how it affects company performance. Moving on to the next slide. Clearly now a bit more optimistic, right? It's in color. So what was a risk is now an opportunity. So you have crowded cities. What do? You need increased power demands. You meet them not through fossil fuels, but through renewables. Mars just spoke earlier about renewables. I think this is a huge area of growth. Smart cities in the center column. And I think Kenneth also talked about Singapore. I think that was a good example because when you talk about Singapore as the #1 smart city, I foresee a lot more Asian cities are going to do that. And when they start having increased populations, they will have to go down this road. So look at waste management, power generation, and smart mobility, which Albert will be touching on next. Now, the last part is, what about governance? What about diversity and inclusion? It's very important to have robust governance because I think companies that are not resilient, are not equipped to face challenges of the future are by definition not sustainable. So coming to the next slide, I will now just give you an overview of what to expect from my remaining three colleagues who will touch on, the rest of environment. Kenneth has already given you a peek at smart cities empowering the future. Albert will come in and talk about smart mobility. And Albert is our CIO, Chief Investment Officer of UOB AM Indonesia. He's going to give you an Indonesian perspective he's going to be speaking about smart mobility. Next, we are going to move on to social and ES squared. ESG, ES squared, Sharia, the first S, the second S is social for human capital management. My colleague from UOB Islamic Asset Management, Suhazi Reza, the CEO, will give you his take. And it's going to be very interesting because he's going to be touching on people versus profits or profits over people. It's a teaser. He's going to give you something that you don't quite expect. And lastly, my colleague from Thailand, UOB AM Thailand, Lin Suriyanong, will come in on governance as a compass for sustainability. And it's not quite the governance that you know. You think governance is something that you know quite well. We have been doing it for a long time. But going forward, how do you overcome data limitations in governance? Data is scarce, data is limited, data is not updated. Lynn will share with you how we're going to do this. And also, is it a passive game or is there an advantage of being active, of being local, research on the ground? I think these are the topics that my colleagues will be sharing with you. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so now I'll just hand this over to Albert Budiman, Chief Investment Officer from UOB Asset Management Indonesia, who will give you his take on smart mobility. Over to you, Albert.
Thank you, Victor. I think you just did a good change crisis into opportunity just now. So good afternoon and greetings from Jakarta. My name is Albert and I'm the CIO of the UOB Indonesia. So if you are living now in the big cities nowadays, you will rarely see electric vehicles down the street, at least here in Jakarta. But imagine 10 years from now, when your kids grow up and they start to have their own driving license, I bet most of them will not know how to fill up a car with the petrol, since there are no more fuel or gas station left nearby. They will only know how to charge a car, maybe charge their phone, and doing the TikTok dance at the same time maybe. So ladies and gentlemen, we should embrace the new trend. Welcome to the EV environment and welcome to the future. So on 2008, if you want to buy a full electric vehicle, you will only get Tesla with its first roadster car. Many of the giant car producers at that time didn't produce and even skeptical about to develop their EV. But now, looking at the Bloomberg NES report, by 2022, if you want to buy a car, you have 500 different models of EV. So you have a lot of choose. And EV sales should rise, forecast to be 54 million by 2050. And in turn, its shares of new car sales should increase to 58% by 2040. The total global fleet size for EV will be reaching 116 million by 2030. It's a huge number. So to make this forecast happen, I think we need to see some of the factors. First is a new technology. We need to see more faster and charging time for the battery. We need to see more compact and longer driving range. Second of all, the most important is the supportive government policies. We see from the European government, US, and the latest one is China, that not only reducing the combustion engine, they pledge to have a zero carbon emission by 2050. And this should be enlarged also by the economic of scale. So many EV cars in the market, they should become more affordable. And lastly, we need to see companies shift in building more EV cars. The latest example is General Motors turn its inefficient Hummer or Humvee to become EV car right now. This is a bold statement from a giant car producer. So talking about EV car, I bet Tesla will be the first comes to our mind. Despite its phenomenon, Lord Elon eccentric leadership, Tesla has been leading the EV car sales globally right now, while the other companies trying hard to follow the same path. I think some Chinese car company follow, such as NIO, with its striking supercar looks and implementing their battery swap car. Not to mention every car from Japan, Europe, US are racing to develop its EV segments to replace their old technology or their combustion engine. But for every EV car produced, it comes with battery as the main source of power. Not many battery producers we know. Let's say LG Chemical, CATL, Panasonic are one of the few names globally. So now those batteries will be produced using raw materials, and this is where nickel play a big role for the majority of battery. Let's see more detail on the next slide. So there are two types of battery that commonly used. First is an NCA, nickel, cobalt, aluminum, with 80% of nickel content, and NMC, nickel, manganese, and cobalt, 30% of its nickel. The larger part of nickel will bring down the battery cost overall. In 2016, nickel-containing batteries make up only like 39% of total produced battery. It is forecast to increase to 58% by 2025. So to give more overview on the demand side, a single EV battery is equal to 10,000 your phone batteries. So we think the demand of battery is certain to extend nickel are extraordinarily large given if EV car sales forecast, hence benefiting Indonesia nickel producer overall. So I think many investors look Indonesia only from global player, from coal to CPO producer, but not many investors realize that Indonesia has abundant supply of nickel. So currently, Indonesia has the highest nickel reserve globally, and although we see the number declining in 2020 because the nickel ore export ban, we still are the biggest producer. So this export ban is not without a purpose, because we want to build upstream to downstream batteries that you can see on the slide right now. So Indonesia state-owned enterprise has took its own role on every segment. Antam in this case will act as upstream suppliers, supplying nickel sulfate to be produced into first-class nickel using HPAL technology in the futures. Pertamina will use the battery manufacturing expertise with LG Chem and CATL. PLN will produce the energy storage system and charging station. And the last mile is National Hijau Lestari, who do the recycling of the batteries. So to wrap up, the nickel process investment should bring GDP contribution of $25 billion, 2.6% of GDP, to have additional employment of 23,000 workforce and increase our trade balance by $9 billion. On the other hand, EV, batteries, and nickel is a multi-year story for Indonesia. Rising along with global sustainability megatrend, we are a step closer to reach our goal to create a better and cleaner air environment. Thank you for listening. Now I'll pass over to Reza to discuss more on Sharia and relation with ESG. Reza, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Albert, and good afternoon to all. My name is Reza, and I'm the CEO of UOB Islamic Asset Management here in Malaysia. When it comes to ESG investing, many a times the least talked about alphabet is the letter S, or social. This typically involves people or human capital. For businesses, which do you think is correct? Profits over people or people over profits? I'd like to take you on a short journey on the social aspect of ESG from a Malaysian perspective. That is by managing ESG together with Sharia investing. When COVID-19 came, it became tough on the people and the economy. However, in every cloud there is a silver lining. Malaysia experienced firsthand a few of these silver linings, which I would like to share with you today. The existence of ESG in Malaysia is not new. In fact, Malaysia introduced several initiatives since 2017. Interestingly, out of the 10 funds recognized as SRI, 6 of it are Islamic. This means that 60% of the SRI funds utilize both Sharia and the ESG principles together. Investors in both the ESG and Sharia have been encouraged with both the ESG and Sharia MSCI indexes outperforming the conventional index for Asia ex-Japan markets, especially in 2020. In Malaysia, Sharia investing and ESG are seen as complementary to each other. Sharia investing uses a negative filter, whilst ESG uses a positive filter. If one has a negative filter and the other a positive filter, why does Sharia investing and ESG seem to work well together? To understand why, we need to look behind the rationale of Sharia investing, which I'll share in the next slide. From this book, published by ISRA, Islamic finance is based on noble values to promote public interest and to prevent harm. They lined out the inspirations to achieve them, listed in the red box: justice, fairness, trust, honesty, integrity, and a balanced society. These are very subjective matters, and hence to simplify them, Sharia listed things as haram and halal within the Islamic framework. There are of course other components to the Islamic framework, which I will not go into details. If you look back at those values mentioned, these are similar to those that ESG also strives for. Now, wouldn't that make ESG and Sharia work towards similar objectives? This concept has been growing in Malaysia, Middle East, and other parts of the world. The red box basically lists human positive values. However, businesses typically prioritize shareholders' value and focus less on its human capital. Which brings the question, should companies focus on profits first or people second? Many of you would have heard of this company, Top Glove, the darling of many when the pandemic started. Being the largest manufacturer of gloves in the world, Top Glove share price soared, posting spectacular profits and becoming the second largest listed company in Malaysia at its peak. Everything was doing great. However, about 6 months into the lockdown in Malaysia, news started to appear on the living conditions of its foreign workers. It seemed that they were not managing its human capital well. Suddenly, global pressure was thrust upon them. Business operations was affected, their reputation was at risk, the regulator was on their back. And what happened to their share price? Let's have a look. Top Glove soared in the first 8 months of 2020, increasing by more than 600%, as shown in the green box. Then came hope of a vaccine, highlighted in yellow. The share price dipped twice, dropping more than 30% from its peak. However, the spread of COVID continued on with the third wave and saw demand for gloves and the share price hitting a new high on 19 October. Then the controversial news started coming in, highlighted in orange and red. Most important was when thousands of its workers were infected towards the end of November and had many of its plants closed. Production was affected despite the high demand for gloves. And then the regulator started to investigate its workers' housing conditions. Given all of this, it is expected for investors to divest their holdings, considering the risk. Is it worth it? Now, how did UOB Asset Management treat Top Glove from an ESG perspective? In our ESG methodology, we have built in an adverse news artificial intelligence, which is able to pick up certain events and trigger it to our analysts. Before all of this, Top Glove was highly rated in our ESG score. As the news broke out, there were 2 important events that triggered a re-rating. The first was when the workers were infected and the plants were shut down. This was recognized by our analysts as a labor management issue, which resulted in the first lowering of their ESG score. The second event was when the Malaysian authorities started investigating Top Glove, which triggered another lowering of their score. This caused us to reduce our holdings in Top Glove. Now, Imagine other ESG investors in the world. They will probably also reduce their ratings and holdings and perhaps contributed towards the drop in the share price. From a Sharia standpoint, the adverse news did not change the business model, nor affect its financial ratios. Hence, Sharia would have continued to invest into Top Glove. However, by combining both methodologies, we are able to take the best of both worlds and invest not just to comply with Sharia and profit requirements, but also for the people, making it a better value proposition for investors. In doing so, this works towards achieving at least 4 of the 17 SDGs that the PRI encourages. So, is it better to choose people over profits or profits over people? Let's together change our mindsets and from now on invest for both profits and people. I hope this has been insightful to you on how Sharia and ESG works together, particularly on human capital management. Thank you for your attention. Now, I'll pass it over to Lynn from our Thailand office for her views on governance.
Thank you, Reza. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lynn Silianong Piyasantiwong. I'm a portfolio manager from the multi-asset team and ESG champion from the Thai office. In this section, I will emphasize the importance of corporate governance. At UOB-AM, we believe that the corporate governance is a compass to the success of sustainable investment. The reason for this is in the next slide. As an investor, we have to avoid investing in poorly managed company. The well-run company typically have the strong corporate governance to begin with. We are looking for good company with long-term focus to the good of all stakeholders, not just shareholders. This company typically have good social and environmental practices. That is why we think corporate governance is the compass of the sustainable finance. Let us hear about the challenge in Asia in the next slide. Most of the countries in Asia are developing. Unsurprisingly, the corporate governance data in developing nations are harder to get than the developed ones, especially the data in standardized format from the widely used database. To tackle this problem, we use the artificial intelligence with news to track the controversy in the company that we are interested in. To complement this process, we utilize our understanding of the local languages and local culture, which are the main obstacle for foreign investors. For this reason, the addition of our Vietnam office at the end of last year will enhance our corporate governance expertise. Let us look at the next slide to show the benefit of the local expertise. HomePro is a leading home improvement retailer with 93 stores in Thailand. It was included in the Set 100 in 2006. UOB-AM started to assess the ESG in 2014 by the Thai office. We identified that this company had a good governance policy. Then MSCI initiated the report on HomePro in 2019 or 5 years later. The stock price has increased a lot before the coverage of MSCI. This case illustrates the alpha generation from our local expertise. Let us hear about the regulator attempts in Thailand. In Thailand, several parties collaborating to promote the good corporate governance practices. The two organizations that are most relevant to us are IOD and CAC. IOD is a non-profit organization. Since 2001, the IOD, in cooperation with the Stock Exchange of Thailand, had assessed the corporate governance practices of listed companies and published the results annually. The results ranged from 1 star to 5 stars. In 2020, around 700 listed companies were covered. 240 companies achieved 5 stars, the excellent scores. CAC is an initiative by the Thai private sector to tackle the corruption problems via collective actions. Currently, around 1,000 companies have joined the CAC. 457 companies have been certified. UOB-AM is a leader in corporate governance investment in Thailand. We launched the first domestic large-cap equity fund, focusing on good corporate governance in 2004. The fund manager can invest only in the company with the IOD rating result higher than 3 stars. The fund has outperformed the SET index since inception. The next slide will show the regional ranking of the governance. The ASEAN Corporate Governance Scorecard is the only regional governance scorecard in Asia. It covers the largest 100 companies from each of the 6 ASEAN countries. Why is the slide so interesting for an investor? When the company gets good corporate governance scores to be shown in this slide, it is a powerful message to show all stakeholders that this company has strong corporate governance performance, which is the compass to the sustainable finance in our view. Thank you for your attention. I will hand this over to Victor for Q&A session.
Thank you, Lynn. I want to stay on that slide, actually, the last slide that you showed. I think I wanted to highlight to our audience when Lynn mentioned companies that appear in this kind of ranking, positive rankings, they will get a better reputation. Investors will follow them more closely. And by no coincidence, through sheer hard work, I think you can see for yourself in the top left corner, UOB, one of the top 3 companies in Singapore in terms of corporate governance. So thanks, Lynn. I think this is a very nice slide. Now, moving on to question and answers. Earlier during registration, we received quite a number of questions from the registrants. We have put together the key ones, the most often asked questions in this part. All right. Now, the first question that we had seen that was actually very interesting. Budket's speech talked about the elephant in the room, and that was China. In fact, probably there's a second elephant in the room, and these are the terms. Trade-off, sacrifice, compromise. Are there compromises, sacrifices, and trade-offs when you do sustainable investing? Is it really possible for us to invest for both profit and purpose? Marsha, can I turn this over to you? Can you tell us from a global perspective, how would you show there is indeed possible to invest for both profit and purpose? Marsha?
Thank you, Victor. Yes, of course, I would be happy to take that question. And it's a question that, of course, is asked a lot when it comes to sustainable investing. First of all, I would like to turn it around. Is it possible to only invest for profit and not for purpose? Is it possible to run a company only for profit and not for purpose? I think it's not possible, because you will run into issues that will cost a lot of money in the future. So if you turn it around, I think it makes quite a lot of sense that you, as a company, need to have purpose. And a lot of the most successful companies do have a very clear purpose. And that is why they are so profitable. So I think that is very important. And then maybe making it a little bit more concrete, because that's really more from a philosophy standpoint, of course. Morningstar has done research last year into, I think it was over thousands of funds, ESG funds that are listed in Europe. And they have actually found that there is no trade-off at all, that these sustainable funds, and they only take into account funds with a good track record, actually have on average higher Morningstar scores, and they outperform their the traditional peers in almost every time frame that they looked at, even going back to 10 years. So I think that is a very strong, let's say, support for the fact that we can actually really say that we can invest for both profit and for purpose.
Glad to hear that, Marsha. I think that's a very good answer. I like that. Can I just also invite Reza? Reza, Marsha has given her perspective from a global point of view. Can you share with us, because you had on-the-ground experience in Malaysia, for example, and around the region. Tell us, Reza, does this also hold true in the case for Asian fund managers based in Asia, investing in Asia? Reza?
Thanks, Victor. I think basically the short answer to that is basically yes. We do think that, no, there is no trade-off. In fact, it is better for the investors. But basically, when you look at ESG, there is always, it is driven by the global investors, if you may. So when you look at it being from a global perspective, we are here in Asia. It is different from what the investors in Europe they look at, and what us, the investors in Asia, we look at. I would know my backyard a lot better than I suppose anyone from the other part of the world. So I think that yes, although ESG would give you that chance, but it will also maybe require some tweaking to add that Asian flavor, to add some curry, some chili powder. That's what we are used to. So to me, it would be important for us to take the ESG and add that local flavor, if you may. So with us being here in Asia, I mean, UOB, as I mentioned, being here in Asia, I think that having the presence around, I mean, you heard our colleagues from Singapore and from Indonesia and from Thailand. We also have other offices around the region as well. So by having that extra advantage, I believe that we are then able to search for the extra added value and search for those with the resources that we have, the processes that we have, and look for those good quality companies and actually provide that what we are looking for profit and purpose.
All right. Thank you, Reza. I think that was a very good answer. And we mentioned earlier, we are doing this during lunchtime, and we promised to complement your meals. And Reza has actually thrown in curry and chili powder to make it extra spicy for you. So you heard it from Masha and from Reza. The answer is a resounding yes. You can invest for both profit and purpose. Okay. Now on screen we see a question about Elon Musk, his latest tweet on nickel. Albert, I have to apologize for doing this. I heard you saying good things about my recovery just now, but I would have to invite you now because I remember your presentation, you talked about Tesla. So Albert, can I ask you, the latest tweet from Elon Musk about his nickel comments, what's your view on that? And also, new technologies like solid-state batteries, risk or opportunity? Albert?
Yeah. Thanks, Victor. I think Elon has 48 million followers on Twitter, so I don't surprised that this kind of question is coming right now. But okay, so let's discuss what is the tweet. He concerned about nickel, and he also want to shift the standard range car production to an iron cathode. First, let us discuss shortly on iron cathode. What is that? It's called LFP actually. It's lithium iron phosphate. It's a type of lithium-ion battery using the LFP as the cathode material and the graphitic carbon electrode with a metallic backing as the anode. The main drawback of LFP is its low electrical conductivity. In short, LFP has a shorter range and less power as compared to nickel content battery. And it's also performed badly during the cold temperature of winter season right now. They need some battery warmer installed. So on the other hand, nickel in the battery provides a higher energy density and a storage at a lower cost and crucially contributes to longer drive range. All in all, we think Tesla will not forego all its nickel batteries given the drawback from LFP. And I see the top range model from the ludicrous boat still need battery nickels. Instead, it's an opportunity for any country or companies that can provide Tesla with abundant and reliable nickel supply. So it's opportunities. And to come to your second question, we should expect new technology coming up. Solid-state battery is just one of them. They can provide more energy density up to 400 watt-hour per kilogram. This is the highest among all battery, and nickel only 300 watt-hour per kilogram. It's also removed the anode by using ceramic separator, so the size should be smaller and compact, but the main drawback is the cost. The cost is just way too high for now. But overall, the good news is solid-state batteries still using nickel as part of their cathode, so the nickel story still remain intact as the main component of EV battery going forward. Thank you, Victor.
Thanks, Albert. Good answer. As you can see, Albert is our Mr. EV and Mr. Nickel, clearly an expert in this area. Next question. Can we have the next question? Okay, yes, we did talk about top-down. Okay, government policies are important, not to underestimate the impact of top-down government policies. What is the outlook in terms of financing? That is the question. I turn this to Mr. Smart City. Kenneth, you had a presentation on the Singapore example, and you also talked about this is happening across Asia. Kenneth, could you take this question and let us know what the potential is like outside? for this area? Kenneth?
Thanks so much, Victor. Yeah, I think this is a really good question. So I think maybe I'll just take a step back. So just last year, I mean, if we look at the whole global situation, right? We saw the issuance of sustainable bonds, which includes green, social, sustainability, and sustainability-linked bonds, exceeded US 520 billion. And this number is actually 63% up compared to 2019. And this whole growth of sustainable bond issuance in the markets, right, also kind of like alludes to the strong positive response from markets to such issuances. And I think what we can see moving forward is this issuance of sustainable bonds to pick up and grow in 2021, especially with the world taking a stronger stance on sustainability and climate change. Now, moving to Asia, we expect to see strong sustainable bond issuances moving forward, especially in countries such as Japan, South Korea, China, as these countries are looking to advance their renewable energy infrastructure and to power their economies and also meet future commitments on their carbon neutrality. Now, I think going back to the theme on smart sustainable cities, just early this year, in January, we saw Hong Kong government issuing its US 2.5 billion green bonds across multiple tranches to finance the sustainable development of Hong Kong. And on the corporate side of things as well in Hong Kong, we saw New World Development, which was the first real estate developer in the world to price a USD sustainability-linked bond. And following this, there was another first here in Singapore, where we saw Sabana Jurong Group being the first in Southeast Asia to issue a Singapore dollar-denominated sustainability-linked bond. So with all this first and all this growing momentum in terms of issuance, right? Going forward, what we see, what we believe is that with growing greater investor interest, growing government support, corporate participation, there will be stronger growth in sustainable bond issuances in Asia with more financing opportunities, and of course, sustainability fixed income opportunities for investors out there.
Right, thanks, Kenneth. I think rightly put, total agreement with you. This has been a year of many firsts. We expect this momentum to continue. I think your points were correct, and we should look forward to this kind of financing needs, the capital markets in this space being broader, being deeper. And I think, again, another very large opportunity for the investment community. Now, Raphael, I believe we have time for one last question. Okay, the question is, you can see on screen, a lot of discussion on the future of ESG. Does it go quant-based, passive, or if there is an advantage for asset managers and owners who take an active approach? Lynn, can I turn to you? Your presentation touched on how you approach, say, for example, governance and ESG in Thailand, and you also touched on local cultures and data limitations. Lynn, if you could help us, could you share your views on whether we should go passive or whether we should do an active approach to ESG? Lynn?
Thank you for the question, Victor. One-based strategy using only third-party data may not be effective if given the scarcity of that data, especially in Asia with so many developing countries. As I mentioned earlier in the slide, the governance data is harder to get for developing countries than the developed one. The interaction with the companies on the ground, with the understanding of local cultures, are the key to success in ESG investing in our view. At UOB-AM, we have developed the proprietary natural language processing model to track the controversies on real-time news at the company level. The model outputs are used to alert us to assess ESG impact of the news. We complement this proprietary model with the analyst inputs from all regional offices. Our model is a real-time system that runs 24/7. This allows us to adjust the ESG score in a timely manner. This is how we combine technology with the regional expertise in the ESG investing area.
Approach has to be active, customized to local regions, and I think managers that can do this will have a strong competitive advantage. So I think we have come to the end of the webinar. With this, I think we have run out of time. Here on screen, you see a survey. Please take your time to respond to this survey. But before you leave, a quick recap of the entire seminar. I think we have heard that sustainable investing is a mega trend and it offers a lot of opportunities. As members of the investment community, I think we can and we should play a role in this. I think that is very well established. We have heard from Robeco, we have heard from UOB Asset Management, These two managers have already responded to the call to action. So today, for the rest of you, join us on this sustainable investing journey. With that, I would like to thank all the presenters for sharing your insights. I'd like to thank all of you in the audience for sharing your time. And again, we have another webinar coming up on innovation. Perhaps within this seminar, we will unveil the company that can produce a technical glitch-free webinar. Maybe it's a special type of software. With that, I think thank you, everyone. Stay safe and goodbye.